My name is Olivia Bennett. I am 26 years old, and I'm from Seattle, Washington. What happened to me when I was 15 is something my parents hoped would stay buried forever. One lie from my sister, one stormy night, and one decision that proved exactly where I stood in my own family. But the part they never expected was who would find me when they left me behind. Have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do, by the very people who were supposed to protect you? What would you do if your own parents believed a lie so quickly that they abandoned you in the middle of a violent storm? Would you keep begging them to believe you, or would you remember that moment forever? And what happens when the person who saves you that night turns out to be someone your parents fear more than the truth itself? Because when my dad finally saw who had taken me in, his hands started shaking, and suddenly, that lie didn't look so safe anymore. I was 15 years old when the lie that changed everything started. Up until that night, my life looked pretty normal from the outside. My parents weren't perfect, but we had routines, family dinners, school talks, the occasional argument about curfew. My younger sister, Lily, and I had always had that typical sibling rivalry. She was the one everyone described as sensitive and fragile, while I was the one expected to be strong and responsible. Looking back now, I realized that difference mattered more than I thought. That evening started like any other. I had just gotten home from track practice, still wearing my muddy sneakers and holding my backpack over one shoulder. The house was unusually quiet. Normally, Lily would already be in the living room, watching something loud on TV. Instead, I heard my mom's voice upstairs, sharp, tense, the kind of tone that makes your stomach tighten before you even know why. "Olivia, come upstairs." Now, something about the way she said it made my chest feel heavy. When I reached the top of the stairs, both my parents were standing outside Lily's bedroom. My mom's arms were folded tightly across her chest, and my dad looked angrier than I'd ever seen him. And Lily, she was sitting on the edge of her bed, crying. The second she looked up at me, her eyes widened like she'd just seen a ghost. "That's her," she said through tears. "That's the one who did it." For a moment, I honestly thought she was joking. "Did what?" I asked. No one answered right away. My dad stepped forward, his voice cold and heavy. "Your sister says you stole her college savings envelope." I blinked, completely confused. "What?" I laughed nervously. "Dad, I didn't." "She also said you threatened her when she confronted you," my mom interrupted. The words felt like they hit me physically. "That's not true," I said quickly. "I didn't take anything." But Lily shook her head dramatically, tears streaming down her face. "I saw you in my room earlier," she cried. "You thought I wasn't home." My mind raced. Yes, I had gone into her room earlier, but only to grab a charger she borrowed from me. "That's because of the charger," I said. "You know that," but Lily kept crying harder. "She's lying," she whispered. "She told me if I said anything, she'd make everyone hate me." The room went completely silent. And in that silence, I felt something shift. Not one person asked another question. Not one person asked for proof. My parents had already decided. My mom looked at me like she was staring at a stranger. "Olivia," she said slowly, "this isn't the first time you've acted selfish." My jaw dropped. "What are you talking about?" "You've always been jealous of your sister," she continued. Jealous? The word felt so absurd I almost laughed again, but no one else seemed to think it was strange. My dad stepped closer, towering over me. "Where is the envelope?" "I don't have it," I said, my voice starting to shake. "I swear." "Then explain why Lily would lie," he demanded. That question echoed in my head, because I didn't know. I looked at Lily, hoping she'd crack, hoping she'd admit this had gone too far, but she didn't. She kept crying, avoiding my eyes like I'd actually hurt her. And that was the moment I realized something terrifying. My sister didn't just tell a lie. She told a lie she knew our parents would believe. The conversation turned into accusations faster than I could defend myself. My parents started listing every small mistake I'd ever made, every late homework assignment, every time I'd rolled my eyes during an argument, every tiny flaw suddenly turned into evidence against me. It felt like I was standing in a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. I kept saying the same thing over and over. I didn't take it, but the more I said it, the less they seemed to believe me. Finally, my dad ran a hand through his hair and let out a long breath. "Until that money shows up," he said, "we're going to assume Lily is telling the truth." Those words shattered something inside me. Because in that moment, I realized something I'd never understood before. It wasn't just about the envelope. One lie had flipped a switch in my family, and suddenly, I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was the problem. That night is burned into my memory in a way that still feels unreal sometimes. After the argument upstairs, the atmosphere in the house turned thick and suffocating. No one spoke to me at dinner. My mom placed a plate in front of me without even looking up. My dad kept checking his phone, like he was trying to distract himself from being in the same room as me. And Lily, she stayed in her room, playing the role perfectly. Every once in a while I could hear her sniffing loudly, making sure everyone remembered she was the victim. I kept waiting for someone, anyone, to calm down and actually talk to me. I thought maybe my dad would come into my room later and say something like, "Let's figure out what really happened." But that moment never came. Instead, around 9 that night, my dad called my name from the living room. "Olivia, get your jacket." I walked downstairs slowly, confused. My parents were already by the front door. My mom had her car keys in her hand. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Just get in the car," she said. Her voice had that same cold edge from earlier. Outside, the sky had turned almost black. Thick clouds rolled over the neighborhood, and the wind had picked up so much that tree branches were scraping against the houses. The smell of rain was already in the air. The drive started in complete silence. The only sounds were the windshield wipers and the heavy rain beginning to slam against the glass. Streetlights blurred past us as the storm grew stronger. After about 15 minutes, I realized something strange. We weren't heading toward town. We were driving toward the old highway that cut through a stretch of forest outside the city. My stomach tightened. "Where are we going?" I asked again. My dad stared straight ahead at the road. "You need time to think," he said flatly. "Think about what?" "About telling the truth," my mom replied from the passenger seat. My chest felt like it dropped. "I already told you the truth." Neither of them responded. Lightning flashed across the sky, lighting up the trees on both sides of the road. The rain was pouring so hard now that it sounded like thousands of tiny rocks hitting the car. Then suddenly, my dad slowed down. The car rolled to a stop on the shoulder of the empty road. For a moment, I thought maybe the car had broken down, but then my dad turned toward me. "Get out," I stared at him, sure I had heard wrong. "What?" "You heard me," he said, his voice sharp. "Get out of the car." My heart started pounding so loudly I could barely hear the rain anymore. "You can't be serious," I said. My mom twisted around in her seat and pointed toward the door. "Maybe a little time out here will help you remember where the envelope is." The words didn't make sense. "You're leaving me here?" I asked. Lightning cracked again, followed by thunder so loud it shook the car. "You'll walk home," my dad said. "It'll give you time to think." Home was miles away. And the storm was getting worse by the second. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling now, "please, I didn't do anything." For a split second, I thought I saw hesitation in his eyes. But it disappeared just as quickly. "Out, now!" My hands felt numb as I reached for the door handle. The moment I opened it, freezing wind and rain blasted into the car. Within seconds, my clothes were soaked. I stepped onto the wet gravel shoulder, shivering. "Please don't do this," I said, leaning toward the open door. Neither of my parents looked at me. My dad shifted the car into drive. The door was still open when the car started moving. "Wait," I shouted, but the door slammed shut as the car pulled away. Red taillights faded into the rain. And just like that, they were gone. I stood there on the side of the road, completely alone. The storm roared around me. Wind whipped my hair across my face, and rain soaked through my jacket until it clung to my skin. The highway was empty. No houses, no streetlights, no sound except thunder and the pounding rain. At 15 years old, I had never felt so small in my life. I started walking because I didn't know what else to do. Each step splashed through puddles forming on the cracked asphalt. My sneakers were already filled with water, and the cold started creeping into my bones. I kept thinking the same thing over and over. They're going to turn around. Any minute now, I thought I'd see headlights coming back. My parents would realize they'd gone too far. They'd pull over, open the door, and tell me to get back in the car. But the road behind me stayed dark, and after 20 minutes of walking through that storm, I realized something that hurt worse than the cold. They weren't coming back. By the time I had been walking for what felt like forever, my entire body had started to shake uncontrollably. The rain had soaked through every layer of clothing I had. My sneakers squished with every step, and the cold wind kept cutting straight through my jacket like it wasn't even there. My fingers were stiff and numb, and my teeth kept chattering no matter how hard I tried to stop them. I didn't know exactly how long I had been walking. Maybe 30 minutes, maybe an hour. Time started to blur when you were cold and scared and alone on an empty road. The highway stretched endlessly in both directions. No houses, no gas stations, no people. Just darkness and the sound of the storm. At some point, I started wondering if I should leave the road and try to find shelter in the trees. But the forest on both sides looked even darker and more terrifying than the highway itself. The wind made the branches sway violently, and every crack of thunder made the woods feel alive in the worst possible way. So I kept walking, step after step. I wrapped my arms tightly around myself, trying to keep some kind of warmth trapped inside my body. My parents' words kept echoing in my head. "You'll walk home. It'll give you time to think." The more I thought about it, the more unreal it felt. How could they believe Lily so quickly? How could they leave me out here without even questioning what really happened? The rain kept pouring harder, and I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. That's when I saw the headlights. At first, they were just two tiny glowing dots far down the road behind me. Through the rain, they looked blurry and distant. My heart immediately started racing. Part of me hoped it was my parents coming back. Maybe they realized what they had done. Maybe guilt finally caught up with them. I turned around and stood still, watching the lights slowly grow brighter. But as the vehicle got closer, I realized it wasn't their car. It was a pickup truck, and suddenly, a different kind of fear crept in. I was 15 years old, standing alone on the side of a dark highway in the middle of a storm. Every warning adults had ever given me about strangers rushed into my mind all at once. The truck slowed as it approached me, then it pulled onto the shoulder about 10 feet ahead. The engine idled for a moment. I froze. Rain poured down my face as I tried to decide what to do. The driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out, quickly pulling the hood of his jacket over his head to block the rain. He looked to be in his late 40s or maybe early 50s, with a thick beard that was already soaked. He looked at me for a second, clearly surprised. "Kid," he called over the storm, "what are you doing out here?" I didn't answer right away. My instincts were telling me to be careful. He seemed to notice my hesitation immediately. Instead of stepping closer, he stayed where he was beside his truck. "I'm not gonna come any closer," he said calmly. "But you shouldn't be out here alone in weather like this." His voice wasn't angry or suspicious. It sounded concerned. "I'm fine," I said automatically. Even as the words left my mouth, I knew how ridiculous they sounded. My entire body was shaking, and I must have looked like I had just crawled out of a river. The man glanced down the empty highway behind me. "Car break down?" he asked. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to lie. But something about the way he kept his distance and spoke gently made the truth slip out before I could stop it. "My parents left me," I said quietly. For a second, he didn't say anything. He just stared at me like he was trying to make sure he heard that right. "They left you," he repeated slowly. I nodded. "In this storm?" I didn't respond. I just looked down at the wet pavement. The man let out a long breath and ran a hand over his beard. "That's not right," he muttered. Another crack of thunder exploded above us, making me flinch. The man looked back at me again. "Listen," he said carefully. "I've got a heated cab, and the next town's about 10 minutes down the road." I didn't move. Every warning about strangers was still echoing in my mind. He seemed to understand that. "Tell you what," he said, raising both hands slightly like he was showing he meant no harm. "You don't even have to get in if you don't want to. But at least sit in the truck with the door open until the rain lets up. You're gonna freeze out here." The wind howled down the highway again, sending another wave of cold water through my clothes. My body shivered so hard my knees almost buckled, and in that moment, something became painfully clear. The only person who had stopped to help me was a stranger. While the people who were supposed to love me most had driven away, slowly, I took a few steps toward the truck. The man didn't move. He simply walked back to the driver's side and opened the passenger door from inside. Warm air spilled out into the cold storm. And for the first time that night, I felt like I might actually survive it. The warmth inside the truck felt almost unreal after the freezing rain outside. The moment I sat down in the passenger seat, my whole body started trembling even harder. It was like the second my muscles realized I was somewhere safe, they finally let go of the tension they had been holding for the past hour. The heater blasted warm air toward my frozen hands. "Here," the man said, reaching behind the seat and pulling out an old towel. "Dry off a little." "Thank you," I whispered, my voice still shaky. He gave a small nod, but didn't ask too many questions right away. Instead, he put the truck in gear and slowly pulled back onto the highway. The windshield wipers worked furiously against the heavy rain as we drove. For the first few minutes, neither of us spoke. I kept staring out the window, watching the dark forest blur past. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold instead of my own. Finally, the man spoke. "You got a name, kid?" "Olivia," I said. "Well, Olivia," he replied, "I'm Frank." He kept his eyes on the road as he spoke, which somehow made me trust him a little more. "Want to tell me what happened?" I hesitated. Even after everything, a part of me still felt protective of my family. Saying the truth out loud made it feel bigger, more real. But something about the quiet truck, the storm outside, and the fact that this stranger had already done more for me than my parents had that night made the words come out. "My sister told my parents I stole something," I said. Frank glanced at me briefly. "And you did? No, what was it?" "Money, her college savings envelope." Frank frowned slightly. "And that was enough for them to leave you on the side of the road?" I nodded. For a moment, the only sound in the truck was the rain hitting the roof. Frank let out a quiet sigh. "People believe what they want to believe," he muttered. We drove for another 10 minutes before we reached a small town. It was the kind of place with only a few streetlights and a handful of businesses along the main road. Frank pulled into the parking lot of a small diner that still had its lights on. "You're soaked," he said. "Let's get you warmed up properly." Inside, the diner smelled like coffee and grilled food. The warmth wrapped around me instantly, and I suddenly realized how exhausted I was. Frank ordered hot chocolate for me and coffee for himself. While we sat in the booth, I noticed something about him. People in the diner seemed to recognize him. A waitress waved at him from across the room. "Evening, Frank," she called. "Evening, Carla," he replied. That made me feel even safer. He wasn't just some random stranger passing through. He was part of this town. After a few minutes, Frank asked gently, "Your parents know where you are right now?" I shook my head. "No," he rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Your school, they know about your sister's accusation." "No," I said. "It just happened tonight." Frank leaned back in the booth, thinking. "Well," he said slowly, "truth has a funny way of showing itself eventually." I didn't respond, but I hoped he was right, because at that moment, it felt like my entire life had flipped upside down. Over the next couple of days, I stayed in a spare room above Frank's garage. His house sat on the edge of town, simple but warm. He called the school the next morning and explained that there had been a family situation. For the first time since that night, I had space to breathe. But something else was happening at the same time. Back at my parents' house, the story Lily had told was beginning to fall apart. It started with a small detail. My mom found the envelope. Not in my room, not hidden anywhere in the house, but inside one of Lily's own desk drawers. At first, Lily tried to explain it away. She claimed someone must have planted it there. But the more my parents looked at the situation, the more cracks began to appear. The timeline didn't match. Her story kept changing. And then came the moment that made everything impossible to ignore. The security camera from the neighbor's driveway, something none of us had even thought about. It showed something very clear. Earlier that afternoon, before I got home from track practice, Lily had walked into the house holding the exact envelope she later claimed was missing. When my parents saw that footage, the silence in their living room must have been unbearable. Because suddenly, the truth they had refused to consider was staring them directly in the face. And with it came a realization they couldn't undo. They hadn't just believed a lie, they had abandoned their daughter because of it. 3 weeks passed before my parents finally found me. During those weeks, my life felt strangely quiet compared to the chaos I had left behind. Frank never pushed me to talk more than I wanted to. He gave me space, made sure I had warm meals, and helped me contact the school so my absence wouldn't turn into something worse. It still amazed me that a man who had met me on the side of a stormy highway treated me with more patience and respect than my own parents had that night. Meanwhile, things at my parents' house were falling apart. After the security footage exposed Lily's lie, the entire story collapsed. My sister tried everything to explain it away, first saying she forgot where she put the envelope, then claiming someone must have moved it. But the video made it impossible to ignore the truth. The more questions my parents asked, the more her story unraveled. Eventually, she admitted it. She had hidden the money herself. Why? Because she was angry that my parents had been praising my track performance earlier that week. She said she felt like I was stealing the attention, and she wanted them to be mad at me instead. When my dad heard that, he reportedly sat down at the kitchen table and didn't speak for several minutes, because that meant something much worse. They hadn't just believed a lie. They had abandoned their daughter in a storm because of it. Once that reality settled in, my parents started trying to find me. At first, they called my friends, then relatives, then even the school. But no one had seen me since the night they drove away. By the 3rd week, the guilt must have been unbearable. That's when someone finally mentioned the small diner on the edge of Frank's town. One of my classmates had seen me there a few days earlier while visiting family nearby. So one afternoon, a car pulled into Frank's gravel driveway. I was sitting on the wooden steps outside the garage, finishing a homework packet Frank had helped me print earlier that morning. The sky was clear that day, the complete opposite of the stormy night that had brought me here. When I saw the familiar car roll to a stop, my chest tightened instantly. My parents stepped out. They looked different. My mom's eyes were red like she hadn't been sleeping. My dad's shoulders seemed heavier somehow, like he had aged years in just a few weeks. For a moment, none of us moved. Then my dad started walking toward me slowly. "Olivia," he said, his voice quiet. I didn't stand up. Before he could say anything else, the front door of the house opened behind me. Frank stepped out. "Everything all right out here?" he asked. My dad looked up, and the second his eyes landed on Frank, something strange happened. His entire expression froze. For a moment, he just stared. Then his hands started trembling slightly at his sides. "Frank," he said under his breath. I turned, confused. "You two know each other?" I asked. Frank crossed his arms calmly. "Oh, we know each other," he said. My dad swallowed hard, suddenly looking like he wasn't sure where to stand. It took a moment for me to understand what was happening. Frank wasn't just a kind stranger who happened to stop that night. Years earlier, he had been my dad's supervisor at the construction company where my father worked before switching careers. Frank had been known for being strict but fair, the kind of boss who didn't tolerate dishonesty or excuses, and apparently, he remembered my dad very well. Frank looked directly at him. "You left your 15-year-old daughter on the side of the highway during a storm," he said calmly. My dad's face went pale. I didn't know she came here," he stammered. "That's not the point," Frank replied. The air between them felt heavy. My dad looked down at the ground, his hands still shaking slightly. "We made a mistake," he said quietly. Frank didn't respond right away. Instead, he glanced at me, then back at my parents. "You didn't just make a mistake," he said. "You made a choice." The words landed hard. For the first time since they arrived, neither of my parents tried to argue. They just stood there in silence. And in that moment, something became very clear. The power in that situation had completely changed. The same parents who once drove away while I begged them to stop were now standing in front of the one man who had refused to leave me behind. And judging by the way my dad's hands kept trembling, he knew exactly how badly they had messed up. Before this story ends, I want to ask you something. If you were in my place, what would you have done? If the people who were supposed to protect you believed a lie and left you in your darkest moment, would you forgive them? Or would that night change how you see them forever? Because sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people we trusted the most. So tell me honestly in the comments, should I have forgiven my parents after what they did? And if this story kept you hooked until the end, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because the next story might be even more shocking than this one. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Eyes fire.